Awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the discussion today. Quickly starting with an intro about myself. I'm Johan, founding partner at Lucid Capital. We back serial founders in Europe at inception in AI software. And we've done 17 investments at this point. And one of our portfolio companies, if not the most exciting portfolio company, is called GeneralMind. And the entire reason why we invested in GeneralMind at inception was because the man next to me has experienced the messiness of ERP systems in his previous company. And having said that, Tushar, handing over to you, I would love to, get an introduction about yourself and the journey, how you arrived at GeneralMind.
Okay. Thank you, Johan. And probably say that about every portfolio company, but I accept your accolades. Maybe start with a quick intro on myself and then how I ended up starting GeneralMind. I'm Tushar, born and raised in Düsseldorf, Germany, into an Indian family. And my plan, unfortunately, was to become a banker at some point in my life. And luckily, that didn't pan out because I met Olli Samva of Rocket Internet, who Johan also worked for at some point in his life. He sent me to India, the country of my roots, where I built a bunch of e-commerce businesses and came back to Berlin and with a pandemic to start Razor Group. Razor Group has been one of the German unicorn businesses. The business went from 0 to $700 million in scale in a short period of time, and in many ways was a very, very, very complex supply chain. And why was it so complex? Well, we had 500 different suppliers. We had 80% of our revenues were in the US. Our average selling price was only $10. That means many items that were shipped around the world at any given point of time. The business was created by consolidating 300 micro businesses. So it was, in terms of complexity, as complex as it gets. And that's the backdrop against which we looked at initial use cases while we were at Razor Group. And the very first use case was on the procurement side, where we saw many white-collar workers doing a lot of unstructured stuff, like sending emails, receiving documents, coordinating with suppliers, yelling at suppliers, fighting with suppliers, all on WeChat or WhatsApp or with the phone call or with emails. And they would take that information and then update it into the ERP system, which for us was Oracle NetSuite. And so the first time that we saw sort of ERP system, human beings gluing together the supply chain at handover points, and in this case, the handover point was procurement supplier. And that's basically the genesis for what then eventually became GeneralMind in the first half of 2025, when we were so lucky to partner with Johan. And really at GeneralMind, our ambition is to solve the unstructured layer outside of ERP systems, which sounds very boring and trivial, but it is possible to do in a very nice way post sort of this new technology that we've all been experiencing over the last 12 months and has been accelerating in the last 12 months. And we believe it's a huge opportunity.
Do you have a specific moment in time in mind that made you realize you gotta start another company, you gotta leave Razor and build GeneralMind?
I think, wow, that's a multi-layered question. I think I've always been an entrepreneur, and entrepreneurship is something that I can't live without. So building companies, doing crazy stuff, and going for big goals is something that's very core to my DNA. And I think in 2024, a bunch of things came together. One is I had an awesome co-CEO at Razor Group, which was Max, who I brought in a couple of months prior. Second was the technology shift was so crazy. So you could start doing stuff in 2024 with the advent of ChatGPT 4.0 and 0.1 that made it obvious that this is a quite meaningful change to the world. And then the third piece was, I think after building Razor Group for 5 years, there have been so many different stakeholders and shareholders that I was involved with. So I increasingly felt like the account manager of my shareholders. And so I thought it's a good moment in time to hand it over to a professional CEO and start a new business because of those three things.
That makes sense. Looking at the audience, I'm actually not entirely sure how many of you ever touched an ERP system or saw the interface of an ERP system. I spent a lot of time looking at the space and realized how bloody messy this is. And Tushar, one question that I would love to float to you and understand your perspective is, how much actual work is currently happening within the ERP system, and how much is happening around the ERP system, in emails, in WhatsApp messages, in letters, and like all other forms of communication.
Look, there is a shit ton of work happening at the ERP level. You have multi-billion-dollar businesses that have emerged over the last 20, 30 years and are doing tens of billions of dollars and together maybe hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. So there's a lot of work that ERP systems today already solve for. Having said that, whenever there is a goods flow, and that's certainly been our experience because we build a large e-commerce company or trading company, and whenever there are ERP systems involved, outside of those ERP systems, there seems to be still a lot of work on top of these ERP systems, mostly done by human beings, which are basically triaging information from one application to the other. The joke is, whenever we work with clients, and we are working with some DAX clients today, some really, really large German clients, if you go to the operators that are sitting on top of those ERPs, they essentially just have 3 applications open on their laptop, which is email, some Excel sheets, some Word documents, and then some ERP and the ERP system on the right, and they're constantly switching around. And that is the human glue that is sitting essentially on top of those ERP systems. And it's probably a couple of times bigger, in our view, in terms of potential cost to company, because it feeds into payroll. I hate to be draconian about this, but it feeds into payroll is at least as big an opportunity, if not probably a little bit bigger.
Why is SAP not covering this space?
I think SAP would be excited to cover that space, to be honest. I think, and many other players would be excited to cover that space, including thousands of startups globally, because I do think this is the most exciting space in the application AI layer today. And I think, it's, and it sits outside of the SAP it basically, the unstructured world today doesn't sit inside the ERP world. And, SAP is a placeholder for any ERP. It could be Oracle, it could be Microsoft Dynamics. It sits outside of the ERP world, before the ERP world. So it is what human beings are doing today. Secretarial work, German word for this would be digitale Zettelwirtschaft, I think is a great word. And I'm sure SAP wants to figure out, how they can at scale capture it. But what we have realized over the last quarters, that solving that layer increasingly is a door-by-door game. It's not necessarily a platform game. So it's not like SAP, and we love SAP, we love to work with SAP, we sit on top of SAPs or below, depending on what your perspective is. It's a door-by-door game. You have to go into those companies. You have to understand workflows. You need to be super, super deep into how human beings do processes today. You need to collect context, and it's slightly a different skill set. And it is almost closer to kind of consulting, kind of service businesses, because you have this very heavy, deeply involved deployment motion, where I think there will be a layer that just doesn't make sense for SAP to cover, because it's just so deeply ingrained into a business. And so organizationally, you probably have to build a business that is a mixture. It's probably as product-led as SAP, but it is also as a sort of solution driven as a consulting company. And so you're essentially building a mixture of both to be able to go super, super deep and understand what human beings are doing today, to be able to teach the AI to be accurate. Remember that the AI is obviously a stochastic technology, not a deterministic technology. And so you want to be extremely accurate in the enterprise context. And I think while it's very exciting to be in that layer, and every company wants to be in that layer, I think organizationally you probably build a very different company to do so. And it's fair game because everybody will can do the same motion. I think right now there is a huge opportunity, particularly in Europe, which I think is a little bit neglected versus sort of the US market, to go after those companies and on a door-by-door basis sort of solve the unstructured layer that sits on top of the structured layer.
GeneralMind is a company that is, about a year old, and you've already started working with like some of the largest enterprises in Europe. Would you mind picking like one case study and walk us through like how you landed the account, what was the use case, and how you're continuing to work with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think just yesterday I was in Düsseldorf. I met Klöckner Metals, which is one of our businesses that I think I'm allowed to share contractually as a company that we're working with. We're also working with a very big pharma company based in Leverkusen, which I'm not allowed to share the name of, and other companies. And funny enough, how do we access these kind of huge businesses? It sounds stupid, but it is essentially my co-founder Oliver, who's sitting right there, cold calling these companies and the target ICP within those companies. And because I think we are able to understand the pain of the customer quite well, now also increasingly as we've deployed with more and more companies, I think there is an instant fit. People get when we say human glue, what they mean, because it plagues their every day and they hate it and they know AI can solve it. And so that's our in. And once we're in, I think as much of the business is actually not, or the product is not necessarily what you would think is the product. I think if you come from a SaaS world, you think the product is the front end or the web app that you log into. I think in our case, the product in the AI world is so much more. It is how do you deploy, how do you manage all of the different stakeholders, and more importantly, it is sort of how do you ingest context into the AI so it becomes accurate. So it's the entire harness discussion, right? So if the model is the fuel, the harness is the car, and then we sell sort of mileage, right? And the harness is how do you capture all of the sort of golden data, how do you capture human behavior, give it back to the AI so the AI becomes 99% accurate. And so real use cases that we have now deployed and are in production at scale are usually always at handover points of these businesses' supply chain, right? So whenever there is a handover point within the supply chain, there is unstructured coordination and there is unstructured messiness. For Klöckner, we're on the procurement side, where we handle a so-called use case called purchase order confirmation and follow-ups. Sounds boring, but what it does is essentially it autonomously engages with suppliers to understand where production is, when they will deliver, whether there are price changes or not. And that's important because supply chains rarely have a happy path, right? Supply chains, 80% is an unhappy path, because something goes wrong, delivery is late. Metal prices surge, supplier cannot fulfill at the same price point. And it is that nature of supply chains that makes this technology so exciting, because this technology is dynamic, it understands. So that's what we've done with Klöckner. With another large German retailer, we've been on the other side of the supply chain, not on the procurement, but on the distribution side. They essentially sell Mars and Snickers bars. They're a Rewe subcode to Shell and Aral and all of the kiosks in Germany. So we've been working with large businesses to solve supply chain handover points and messiness thereof.
Thinking about the next 5 to 10 years, we're seeing agents being deployed at Lucid and the value they're generating. Maybe in one sentence, what's your vision for the European enterprise companies when it comes to agents within their ERP systems?
I think, from my perspective, and I'm, obviously you have a wider perspective than me because you see different industries, but from my perspective, Europe has such a huge gift of having so many companies. There are so many companies in Europe. If you include the UK, it's not much less than count of companies in the US, maybe a little bit less, but not much less. And I think there is a real play. And, wherever there is goods flow, wherever there are companies, there is data. There's data that, nobody else can access. So I think there is a real play to not maybe build a huge world model out of Europe, but there is definitely a play to have thousands of industry-specific models based on that specific data and be the best in the world in those micro models. So I think technically, this is where it's headed. We don't need an Anthropic, but if we have like the Anthropic for medical devices, if we have the, for retail, which, you have Aldi, you have Rewe, you have Carrefour, you have so large businesses here, then I think those can be monetized across the world. And I think that is, where the strength also of the German market comes from.
100%. I'm convinced that the future of Europe and the relevance of Europe in the global market depends on our ability to deploy AI at scale in our mid-market and enterprise companies.
And then backward integrate. I think you start with the application, but then you integrate back to the foundational level.
100%. Tushar, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Johan.